It has been the topic at water coolers across America over the past week. Omarosa Manigault Newman's salacious book, Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House.
You might remember she was fired last December by White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. I was thinking of when she was fired from the show, but that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other firing.
And if you don't remember, there's tape to prove it. Omarosa is said to have recorded conversations over the years with many folks, including the president himself.
You might also remember that shortly after leaving the White House, she was asked by ABC News whether she thought Donald Trump was a racist.
Donald Trump is racial, but he is not a racist. The things that he says, the types of pushback that he gives involve people of color. And so these are racial exchanges. Yes, I will acknowledge many of the exchanges, particularly in the last 6 months, have been racially charged. Do we then just stop and label him as a racist? No.
Our Jamal Simmons sat down with Omarosa for an extensive interview. As you'll hear, she's changed her tune on that question a little bit.
Your life is taking you through this entire trajectory really in African America, right? Like, so from Youngstown, Ohio to Washington, D.C. I was asking some family members about this over the weekend, trying to get questions from them about things they cared about. And it's interesting because there's some people who are upset, right? There's some people who are mad at you, they're angry. You know, they thought of you as a villain for a lot of time.
They should be.
But I'm surprised though.
Because they associated me with an administration that they thought was up to no good. And so if that perception that drove that was correct, then they should be. But the reason why I wrote Unhinged, so they could understand what I was working to accomplish. I understand that that story hasn't been told. That's why I had to tell it for myself.
So what I was surprised by, not the people who were upset, but the people who seem to be genuinely worried about you also. And there's a lot of concern, particularly among African American women, who have just concern for you. They want to know why. Why did you go work for Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, we have to back it to 2003. The first question would be, why did I go on The Apprentice? You know, I was aspirational. I wanted to be like Trump. I wanted to be wealthy. I wanted to own businesses. I wanted to be a success. And so back then I signed up to do The Apprentice. I never imagined, Jamal, that from doing that, fast forward 15 years, that I would sit with him in the Oval Office of the White House or in cabinet meetings or on Air Force One. You know, you can't even just make this story up, but that was the true story. When I had an opportunity to go and work on his campaign, it was only after, and I write about this in the book, after what happened to me on the Ready for Hillary debacle, where all of the African Americans who worked very early and very hard to raise money for her, they discarded. And where they were supposed to hire 10 to 15 of us, they only hired one person. And so I was kind of sitting around for about a month trying to figure out politically what I would do when Donald Trump called me. And I thought, what would be the harm of going to work on his presidential campaign? He's a friend, and he probably won't win anyway, so there was no harm. But as fate would have it, we won. And as I looked around, there were no other African Americans to even go into the administration on that high level. And
so what did you see your mission to be as the African American who knew Trump the longest, probably of many of the other African Americans who were around him?
Well, I thought that I could build an amazing team if they had, you know, appointed me the head of OPL, Office of Public Liaison. But as we know, Reince Priebus decided not to do that, and he decided to make me the spokeswoman for the Office of Public Liaison, and he put someone else over putting a team together. So instead of like in Obama's administration, there were 14 people doing African American outreach. In Trump's administration, would you like to guess how many people were doing African American outreach?
I'm guessing one, but you tell me.
I was the only one, and so. Yeah, I had to do that because if I didn't, that work would have not gotten done.
So a lot of examples of, you called them racial things earlier in your career, but a lot of people think of them as being more than that. Do you think Trump is a racist?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important that when we talk about racism and racial, that's an academic argument. And sure, if I was still sitting over at Howard University having this debate, it would take on a different meaning. So let me be very clear. The things that Donald Trump has done, the way he toys with race, the way he's trying to incite a race war, it is not funny, it's not to be debated. It is very clear Donald Trump is a racist and he's trying to undermine our democracy.
So what these people want to know is, you started to figure that out. Why did you stay so long?
Well, when you say so long, we started in January.
Right.
I left in December.
Well, some of the racial stuff started during the campaign, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think that while we were going through that, I was the person who would take him to task about those things. I think that you probably have a lot of examples, Jamal, in your life of friends that you thought were one thing and it turns out that they were another. Or friends who got a new job and got brand new on you. Donald Trump is that friend that got a new job and became something else. I mean, instead of him, becoming that candidate that we thought that would become presidential, as we hoped, he became a monster.
So when did you start to figure it out?
Well, it started at that African American listening session that I planned within the first 3 weeks of the administration when he thought Frederick Douglass was still alive. Do you remember that?
I do.
But I had briefed him, and the criticism from the outside is Omarosa's not doing her job. She's nowhere. I briefed the man. I briefed him. I tried to help him. I couldn't give him an entire Black History Month in the 15 minutes I had to brief him in the Oval Office, but I did my best. Even after that, he continued and he started something that I would define as racial. When he started attacking the athletes for kneeling, that started during the campaign. Initially, people weren't calling that a racist act because he was toiling with race. He was only going after African American athletes. And he tried to make something that was about social justice, about patriotism. That is an example of being racial because he knew it would incite his base. He knew it would rally his base. And so he did it intentionally. So
when those things happened, you said you walked in and you talked to him.
Absolutely. I was the only one who could.
Yeah.
I mean, who else? There was no one else to have those types of conversations.
So at what point did you realize you had to start protecting yourself? Or let me not put words in your mouth. At what point did you start taping conversations?
Well, let's be clear about taping. I documented the whole journey from 2003 until 2017, which is the last time that I talked to Donald Trump. It's not just I just woke up and started. I was in a boardroom with Donald Trump for 5 and 6 hour boardrooms. So our whole relationship as it evolved has been documented. But I think in a relationship as long as ours, photos, text messages, videos, emails, I mean, I have this collection of things that I poured into Unhinged that wasn't done in a lascivious way. I mean, if I take a weird email or text message that was sent to me from his team, that's not being lascivious. That's just.
Do you file them?
Do I file them?
Yeah.
I have to be careful because I think you know this. Donald Trump has decided to take legal action against me, and he's filed for arbitration proceedings against me, and so. I have to be very careful. I'd like to be just as open because I have absolutely nothing to hide, but clearly he does by the amount of legal letters I've gotten in the last 7 days. And my publisher, he also went after Simon & Schuster. So the real question is, what does he have to hide? Because I'd like to just open them all up and you can come and peruse my Donald Trump files. But
so one of the other questions I got was, how do you protect yourself?
What do you mean?
Are you worried at all? Trump, the Russians, the Mueller, the FBI. I mean, you're at the center of a storm, and as one of my relatives said, you're kind of like a woman who's on an island by herself.
No, I push back against that.
Do you not feel that way?
First of all, I'm a woman of faith.
Okay.
And the scriptures tell us that to not have that kind of fear or trepidation because God didn't give us a spirit of fear, right? And so I don't operate in that space. But the other thing is I have an entire community of faith that's behind me. When your cousin or relative said that she's all alone, then she just doesn't know me.
Okay.
Not just as a minister or as a pastor, but as a wife, as a daughter. I have an entire community that's behind me and supporting me. But moreover, Jamal, if you see me in a fight with a bear, you've known me long enough. You see me in a fight with a bear, pray for the bear.
Well, let me tell you, one thing I'm not worried about is whether or not Omarosa survives.
That was one of the notes you sent me back in December.
Omarosa survives. So,
tell her that I'm okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to be okay.
Most people probably don't know this, but we've known each other for a long time, probably most of our adult lives at this point.
20 years.
Yeah, 20 years. So you had to call a number. Right?
I did.
It's been forever. But I spent part of this weekend reading your book, Unhinged, so people can see it. I spent the weekend reading the book, and although I thought I knew a lot about you, there are a lot of things in the book that I didn't know about you. Obviously you're from Youngstown, Ohio. You spent a lot of time, you went to Central State, got a master's degree from Howard University. I knew your dad died when you were young, but I didn't realize how young you were.
Yeah, I was 7 years old when my father was murdered. And my mother became a single mom, and she raised the four of us by working 3 jobs. And I think that that really helped to instill in me, one, that life is just not fair. And I experienced loss at such a young age. I was a daddy's girl, and my father was taken from me tragically. But to see my mother rise above those difficult circumstances and to do well. I mean, we lived in the Westlake projects, and in spite of being in that environment, my mother tried to create an environment that was conducive for us to grow and to thrive.
Mama Rosa, as she's affectionately called by some people. You know, there was a scene in the book, though, that struck me because it was something that was very familiar. You talked about walking into a store, a grocery store, with food stamps. As someone who's done that, you know, walked into the store with, you know, WIC stamps and having to, we didn't have cards back then, but you had actual stamps, like, you know, these pieces of paper, and you had to stand there in line. Tell the story about standing there, because I've done this, standing there and having to pay for your groceries using government coupons.
Well, it's the shame of being a welfare recipient that I had to live with. My mother would get on me and wonder why it took me so long to come back from the store just getting milk and a loaf of bread. What she didn't know is that I circled the aisles until it cleared so that I can go and put the food stamps on the counter, because I didn't want people to know that we were on public assistance. I always talk about that this is the only country in the world that created a completely separate currency for its poor. A currency that created a stigma in me that lasted for a very long time. But
how did that impact you as an adult?
Well, as an adult, I think that you live constantly with the threat of poverty. You know, people always talk about how thrifty I am and how I'm very.
Did they say that? Are you
thrifty?
Okay.
You know, I hold on to my money, but it's because I I had food insecurities and, you know, just worrying about what would happen next and that there was another threat around the corner. And so I've always kind of squirreled away my money and saved, and why owning a home was so important to me, to have a place of my own that we wouldn't, you know, be put out or the lights wouldn't go out. All of that really shapes the very essence of who you are. And I have seen my mother overcome all of those circumstances. And so they say that you know, children become what you see. And I saw a woman who was dealt a very, very tough hand, and I saw my mother still make the best out of that.
So Central State University, Howard University, where you got your master's degree.
And I completed my doctoral studies.
That's right.
Was going to defend my dissertation on the 27th of September, but I had to report to The Apprentice on September the 10th.
So let's do a rapid fire real quick before we close out. A rapid fire of some of the folks who are around you, because we want to get a sense of
people who are around me.
Not around you, who are around Donald Trump. Let's go there. So Ivanka Trump. You write in the book about Ivanka Trump and her relationship with her father. Tell us about that.
Their relationship has always made me uncomfortable. And I have a whole file called Mind Your Own Business. So I would have found that under Minding My Own Business. But some of the things that I saw, you know, the way he touched her, the way he kissed her, the way he embraced her, just was not normal. You know, there were moments that, for instance, at the RNC convention during her, you know, when she came off her speech and he grabbed her by her hips and he gazed down into her. I mean, it was just a very intimate moment that was not an exchange between a father and daughter, in my opinion. And so that's kind of what I write about in Unhinged, watching that.
I mean, is this like the Borgia family? Did something happen between them? Like, what are you saying?
You know, I think it's important that you see it in the context of the book, because I don't want to be one of those people who say that this is unconventional, because maybe it's normal for Trump to kiss his daughter on the mouth. Who am I to judge?
Wow. Hope Hicks, you said she's out of her depth. Now people are talking about her being chief of staff. Good idea?
She would first have to know how to spell chief of staff to be chief of staff. And I'm not trying to be shady. It's just Donald Trump hired her because she's pretty. She didn't know what some of the very basic acronyms in politics meant. I said to her once, you know, we should look at our GOTV operations and come up with some talkers from it. And she looked at me because she didn't know what get out the vote meant. But because she was pretty, Donald Trump hired her as the spokesperson for the campaign. And that's why she doesn't give interviews. She doesn't give interviews because she's private. She doesn't give interviews because she doesn't know what's going on. She understands Trump, and she can schedule an interview or, you know, maybe a print interview or a TV interview or write some notes. But that's the extent of her political career.
Okay, let's get to the end. Vice President Mike Pence. You said in the book that some people call him the Stepford Veep, the way that he looks gazingly upon the president. Do you think he's scheming on the #1 spot?
Yes. I had high hopes that Mike Pence would balance out Donald Trump, particularly on some of the stuff that people would perceive as morally compromising. But there he is, Stormy Daniels. Go, he's like, go Trump, go. And I'm like, aren't you going to say something? Charlottesville, he's right there. Every time when he attacked the widow, he attacked congressmen and women, people of color. He has not said anything. And he was supposed to be the voice of reason. There's something very dangerous about a man who would stand there, even though he talks so openly about his moral position in this administration, and he has made no gestures whatsoever to push back. That's where I have a problem.
Yeah, but do you think he might be secretly thinking about being president a little sooner than Donald Trump's terms?
You're trying to get me to give away the best scene in the book, which is talking to his family and the things that they said about him wanting to be president. So yes.
And did he say anything to you about it though? There is a part of the book, I think I remember, where he says something to you.
Yeah,
about
I went to West Point. It was my first trip on Air Force Two. Was flying up with the vice president to West Point for their Black History Month services. And the slip of, his staff kept calling him, oh, meet President Mike Pence. And I'm like, do y'all realize I'm here, right? I'm like standing right here. But that's the culture of the vice president's staff and his world that he's established. But there's no question that he's ambitious, and he's wanted to be president, since he got into politics. That's not been a secret at all.
The last thing I'm going to ask you about is President Obama. We get the sense, and you talk about how Donald Trump feels about President Obama in the book. We get the sense that the Trump administration is trying to erase Barack Obama from the history books.
Yes, they
Did people talk about that inside the administration?
Steve Miller did. Stephen Miller, I feel like, in his entire domestic policy team, came up with a list of the highest profile accomplishments of the Barack Obama administration. And one by one, they have just tried to dismantle everything that he's done and everything he's accomplished. Let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. The decision for Harriet Tubman to go on the $20 bill, there's no reason whatsoever that the Treasury Department has not come out and made a statement about when that actually is going to be implemented. Because it's my belief, because that happened during President Obama's administration, that they're never going to put her on the $20 bill.
And they won't do it for cosmetic reasons, or is there something more to that?
Because it's one of those high-profile accomplishments from his administration, I believe that they will never do that. And I could be wrong.
And you said Stephen Miller started talking about separating mothers from their babies at the border very early.
Oh yeah, his obsession with weaponizing immigration was clear with the travel ban. And I had to inform him that these are people of color, He's like, oh, why do you care? Well, this is my portfolio because 95% of the people who you've stopped from coming into the country look like me. They're people of color, and so you're discriminating. But he didn't understand that. He just wanted to weaponize immigration issues and policies to send fear around the globe. And he has done that successfully.
So what's our takeaway from the book? What do you want us to know about you or your story when we finish this book, or before we even pick it up? What do you want us to know about you and this story?
First of all, I thought this would be a difficult interview because we've known each other for so long, but I thank you for your very insightful questions. I think the most important thing is I am the most misunderstood woman in the Trump universe. People dismiss me as just a reality TV personality without knowing, one, I worked in the White House before, how educated or inexperienced that I am. They knew nothing about my upbringing, or that not only did I lose my father being murdered, my brother was murdered as well. Mm-hmm. They don't know about the trials and tribulations of my life, so this was an opportunity for them to get a better understanding of who I am. But secondly, everybody wonders what it's like to sit in a cabinet meeting or sit in a 3-hour church service with Donald Trump. This is a chance for them to peek behind the curtain in Unhinged.
I know your husband's a minister. I feel like I'm a minister right now because I keep doing the as I close, as I close, as I close.
I mean, you're like a Baptist minister.
But I want to give you one more thing before we go. You were in the White House for that year. What is it that you would say? What's your proudest achievement of what you were able to pull off in that year?
Oh my gosh, getting year-round Pell Grants that affected historically black colleges and universities, the 300,000 students. They lost Pell Grants from the previous administration, and so getting Mick Mulvaney and lobbying to get that money reinstated, not only does it represent billions and millions of dollars over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, but it also represents my commitment to the institutions that help educate and mold and shape who I am. And so I think that that was the greatest accomplishment. My greatest moment, however, was going to Youngstown, Ohio on Air Force One and riding through the streets of Youngstown, even past the housing project I lived in the presidential motorcade. It's something I will never forget.
Well, the book is called Unhinged. People have said lots of things about Omarosa Manigault Newman, including the President of the United States. Look it up on Twitter. I won't say it here because it's offensive. But you can say what you want to say about her, but she's still here. It's been 14 years and you're still here. And so thank you for being a survivor, and thank you for being on Hill TV.
Thank you, Jamal.